Hi, good morning. So I came down to the West Palm Beach station here because I want to talk about a few things. Mostly about a little bit of the history of passenger rail service in the United States post-World War II. Anybody who's watched these videos I post, it's not usually here. It's up near where I live, about 15 miles away from here. Amtrak comes, it stops here. Once it leaves here, it turns to the northwest, and then it goes past my neighborhood, which is off the Beeline Highway, and I like to video it, and it's usually doing the speed limit of 79 miles per hour. Anyway, when I post those videos, I get a lot of comments about, some people like the 79 miles per hour and go, yeah, that was really fast. Other people will come on and say, well, you know, in Europe, the trains go 190 miles per hour, or in China, they go 200 miles per hour, and the bullet train goes 400 kilometers an hour, and the United States is in the 19th century with regards to rail service. And those are fair and valid points. The reason for that is really rooted in World War II. In World War II, it's believed that the United States was able to prevail because of the incredible manufacturing output, right? One of the things they were manufacturing were all sorts of vehicles, tanks, trucks, jeeps, and another manufacturing base that was ramping up was airplane manufacturing. So World War II ends, and you have all these vehicle manufacturers and airplane manufacturers. And they just continue with that after the war is over. Car makers start making a lot of cars. Airplane manufacturers start making passenger planes instead of military planes. And Dwight Eisenhower becomes the president in 1952. Well, he was over there, the supreme commander in World War II, landed at D-Day, and had a terrible time moving equipment because the roads in Europe were made for horse carts. So they had a tough time with the war effort there, because they couldn't move anything because there were no roads. So, however, the Germans, at least inside Germany, didn't have an issue moving stuff because they had already built autobahns. So Eisenhower becomes president in 1952. 1956, they passed the Highway Something or Other Act because Eisenhower thought it would be important to have a interstate highway system from his experience in Europe, the autobahns in Germany and the rest of Germany not having very good roads. So you had auto manufacturers pumping out cars, and you had the President of the United States wanting to build interstate highway system, and you have aircraft manufacturers starting to pump out commercial aircraft, right? So collectively, as a society, starting in the 50s and into the 60s, train service became devalued in a societal sense. Society did not value trains as a mode of transportation, except in small, in small regional like New York City. The subway system was okay. It's the New York City subway system. It might be the way it is, but it is extensive. You can get from one place in New York City, and I mean, when I say the city, I mean just not Manhattan. Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx. You can get to all those. You can get to anywhere on the New York City subway system. So, except for regional transportation, the United States just kind of, as a society, rejected trains as a whole. So what happened is the passenger rail services that were just passenger rail services, they went out of business because they couldn't make money. Then there were railroads that were freight and passenger rail, and those companies made money because of their freight, but they were losing money because of their passenger service. So what eventually winds up happening is all the, long distance passenger rail goes out of business. I think like Penn Central did this big merger with Hartford, New Haven, or whatever. It was all passenger stuff. And when they claimed bankruptcy, it was like one of the biggest bankruptcies in all of history at the time. So what do we wind up with? Well, in 1974, we wind up with Amtrak. And it's now 51 years later, a half a century, and we still have Amtrak. And the closest thing we have to a semi-long distance high-speed rail is the newest that isn't part of Amtrak, is the Bright Line that we have down here in Florida. It goes from Miami to Orlando. And Acelia, which is part of the Amtrak system in the Northeast Corridor, does run as a high-speed rail. But for the most part, the Amtrak trains are stuck at the 80-mile-an-hour speed limit because the tracks are classified as Class 4 tracks, and the speed limit for passenger trains on Class 4 tracks is 80 miles an hour. So we come to present day, and I'm going to prove the point of society not valuing railroad in the context of the Tri-Rail service here in Florida. Tri-Rail goes from its northernmost station is Mangonia Park, the next station north from here, and it goes all the way down to Miami Airport. It has, I don't know exactly, I should have checked, about 20 stops along the way. If you get on at Mangonia and you go all the way to Miami Airport, it takes 2 hours. The point is, it services Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami Dade County. It gets funding of $42 million a year from the state. But last year, the state said, nope, we're not going to give you the $42 million a year. This is FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, and kind of mixed up with the Florida legislature said, yeah, we're not going to give you that $42 million a year anymore. We are only going to give you $15 million a year. So hold those numbers for a second. They're supposed to get 42. They're withholding 27. So they're only getting $15 million from the state that they're supposed to get. Tri-Rail Commission went to the counties and said, we need you to make up the shortfall of approximately $10 million a year per county. Palm Beach County flat out refused. So the funding is good until 2027. I don't know what Broward County has said about the funding, or I don't know what Miami Dade has said about the funding either. And just so that we're not laying this at the feet of, oh, it's the Florida Republican legislature, or the Democrats want to fund it and the Republicans, it's not necessarily the case, because even though the Florida legislature is Republican and we have a Republican governor, Palm Beach County is largely a Democrat, run by the Democrat Party, right? And they're refusing to come up with the extra $10 million. So you can't even lay this at the feet of one party or the other. Interesting side point is that I recently saw an article where the sheriff of Palm Beach County was having to defend the fact that for the first time the sheriff office's budget for Palm Beach County is more than $1 billion. So a county that's spending $1 billion on the sheriff's department can't come up with $10 million for mass transit. Again, I don't want to get into a big, well, do this, do that, but I don't know, a lot of the sheriffs are driving around in $80,000 SUVs. I know, maybe they could use $40,000 patrol cars instead. You know, just a thought. But whatever, I mean, $1 billion on the sheriff is a lot of money, and $10 million to keep your mass transit going that people depend on is not a lot. So here's a couple other numbers that are interesting. So the state has pulled this funding of $27 million, right? The state's budget next year for highways, for highway repair, building new roads, all that kind of thing, is $5.4 billion. So what's 1% of $5.4 billion? $54 million. What's half of $54 million? $27 million. So they can't come up with 0.5% from roads to fund Tri-Rail, which there's a legislative mandate to do so, but they just don't. They've just decided that they're going to ignore that mandate. All right, so there's just somebody walking by, just having a conversation. Anyway, all right, so that's $5.4 billion for roads. That's for 1 year, that budget. All right. then I went and said, well, how much does the state of Florida spend on airports? 2024, the state of Florida spent $112 million on airports. 2025, $254 million budgeted for airports. So, 5.4 billion for roads, 254 million for airports, and only 17 million out of the 42 million that Tri-Rail is supposed to get to operate. If that doesn't clearly prove that rail service is not valued in the United States as compared to automobile and automobile travel and airplane travel, then I don't know what else does. I mean, that's just a gigantic amount of money for roads and airports, and a drop in the bucket for the Tri-Rail, and they don't. It's ridiculous but that's the way it is. So this Tri-Rail operates on this Class 4 tracks. It doesn't go more than 80 miles per hour, and it just goes from Miami to Palm Beach County. But they're having a problem funding it because it's not valued. Of course, it's valued by the people who use it, but people who don't use it, and in general, society just doesn't value this kind of travel. It is what it is, and this is why we don't have high-speed rail all over the country like they do in Japan and they do in Europe, and they're starting to have in China. It also has to do with infrastructure. Once you build infrastructure, it's very difficult to improve on it or rip it up and build new infrastructure, right? So in 1974, while everybody in the United States was driving around in cars, 99% of the population in China was riding bicycles all over the country. They didn't have automobiles. And automobiles are like a new thing in China since 2000. And guess what? They didn't have the infrastructure for the railroads. So now they have high-speed rail because they can go and build rail any place they want in the country because there's nothing there. So this argument that, rail service in the United States sucks. Well, it does because we don't necessarily value it. It's that simple, and it's expensive. And so this is the, I think this is the southbound Tri-Rail behind me. And I think this is one of the longest videos I've ever made. I'm just going to step to the side here as this goes through. So that's my spiel, an answer to everybody who makes the comments on, we don't have high-speed rail, or the rails don't go fast enough in the United States, or whatever, on a little bit of the history of it, and using Tri-Rail in the context of its funding problems right now, that in general, as a society, the United States does not value rail service. Alright, so that's, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. I can't imagine by any long stretch of the imagination that somebody is going to watch all 20 minutes of this on YouTube, but I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and so I have these numbers in my head, and I have a good idea of what I'm talking about.